Today is quite a momentous day for me because 15 years ago to this day was probably the pivotal moment of my career. And it was the day that I walked in to speak to the chief exec of Kodak with something called a Samsung's S200 smartphone. No one had ever put the word smart with the word phone before. So this was quite a... In fact, to be honest with you, then it was called a camera phone, but the smart term was already being spoken about. And I walked in and said to the chief exec, this here can take photos and it's a phone. And he looked at me in the same way as medieval knights would look at Concord. So he just kind of... And I said, yeah, it takes... And he said, well, how many photos can it take? And I said, well, it can take 3. And he said, what's the, how powerful is the what's the lens, what's the pixel rate? And I said, it's 0.2 megapixels. And he said, why are you even in the, how did I, and he's already calling his secretary, how did this guy get in, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I said, no, but see, thing is, in the next 5 years, this here will totally disrupt your business. And in the following 5 years, if you're not actually playing in a wider space, then your business is going to be truly suffering. And I remember being marched out, escorted. Has anyone here been escorted off the premises? It's a really great feeling. Somehow, if you're being escorted off the premises, like properly with like someone on my arm, like hand on my arm, as if I was going to pull out another piece of disruptive technology. You know, it's just like a magician out, a rabbit out of a hat. And obviously, got to 2005, 2006, everything in Kodak's world was looking pretty rosy. It was still okay. However, there had been, admittedly, 800 million camera phones shipped by then, and 68 months later, they filed for bankruptcy. Funnily enough, 15 years ago, tomorrow, I went in to see the chief exec of Fujifilm. Does anyone know Fujifilm, Kodak competitor? And I said exactly the same thing. Pulled out the Samsung S200 phone and said, this here is going to, and I did the whole thing, the 0.2 megapixel. And funnily enough, the chief exec of Fuji, and actually this chief exec of Europe as opposed to down in Asia, the chief exec of Fuji did the opposite of what the Kodak guy said. So the Fuji guy immediately called in an emergency meeting of all of the innovation, strategy, communication, financial, legal people. And he said, listen, there's something in this. If there are going to be hundreds of millions of these things shipped, what does that mean to our business? And what business, even more importantly, what business are we really in? Are we in the business of making better cameras? Is that what we should, or should we make better phones? Should we get into the phone industry? And it's interesting, and you must be thinking right now, hold on a minute, we're inside a Sage stand, admittedly a 2-floor stand, which is very posh. We're in the coolest stand. And you're listening to me talking about 2 Asian camera manufacturers. But believe me, it'll all make sense. So they decided to work on what business they were really in. And they decided that the business they were in was how light affects material, the damage that light has onto material, and how to manipulate that damage. They had elevated themselves to such a position where they realized that they weren't in the business of just making better and better cameras or better and better printers. And so they released what has now become the world's largest anti-wrinkle skincare cream brand called Astelift. And I want you to think, monitor what you're feeling right now in your head. Maybe you're feeling, A, why did I not know that? B, how does he know this useless piece of trivia? C, that's quite cool branding, I love red. D, how did they actually think from being Fujifilm to launching Astelift, which now turns over and actually makes more profit than Kodak made in the last 10 years each year? How did they make that leap? And actually, it wasn't a leap. It was an elevation. It wasn't that movement. It was this movement. They went upwards. And what I'm going to speak about today is why they did that, but not using them ever again as an example, but why that elevation has enabled them to outcompete and not file for bankruptcy, and why, in fact, in the midst of change, in the financial sector, in the bookkeeping sector, in the accounting industry, the only way of forming a competitive advantage as change happens is to do exactly what Fujifilm did, but not necessarily launch an anti-wrinkle skincare green brand, but actually elevate from where we are to see the bigger picture. The reality is, of course, is that today is the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. So the last 10 years change, as you've seen, everything's moved to the cloud, everything's become more digitized, there's app versions of all of the softwares and everything else like that. You can have a consultancy who launches an accounting piece of software. You can have two guys in a bar coming up with an idea and launching something that becomes a massive network of accounting services. But the last 10 years of change is equivalent to the next 2 years in terms of how it feels. And the next 2 years of change will be comparisons to the 6 months after that. So this is what's actually happening with change. And in fact, what we have is a situation where we normally plan our businesses on the white line, the white diagonal line. We plan for growth. You must remember those spreadsheets where we go to the next cell and then times the cell beforehand by times 1 or 0.1. And so we add on our 10% and it goes across, right? That's that line. The reality of all industries, including this one, and I would say in the next 20 slides, probably mostly this one, is on the exponential. And it's the gap between the two, it's the delta between the two that's the disruption. That's what it feels like. That's what Kodak felt. The question is, where do you think you are? Are we here? Are we here? Are we here? And it's an interesting thing on this graph because what happens is that a change happens, a fundamental change happens, and I'll talk about some of those changes. That's why I'm here. And what we first do is we react. We don't respond. We don't choose to respond. We react in the same way as we did last time. React. We just reenact what we did the last time we saw something change, which tends to be what I would call business poison. We react with business poison. See if you recognize any of these statements. Maybe you can look within yourself and think, have I ever felt this? So you see a change happen, and you think, that's not relevant to me. I've got plenty of time to look into that. Oh yeah, we're already thinking about that. Notice the word think rather than do. We've got enough money, so we can compete anyway. We haven't seen any of our competitors doing anything in this space, so therefore we don't need to. These are categorical, suicidal business poisons, viruses that spread amongst the veins of companies. So that means that we tend to perceive a low threat. And in the next 25 minutes, 21 minutes of your life, you may also feel that a lot of the stuff that I cover is of low threat. But then what happens with that no threat or low threat is it inflects and it becomes the mainstream. And as soon as it becomes the mainstream, that's the disruption. So that's just the DNA anatomy of change. And we have to wonder two questions. One is, everything that I go through now, question what business are we really in? What's my reaction and my response to what I see? And what business am I really in? Am I in the business of just the software or service or the product that I provide? And the second question is this. What would disrupt us? This is a guy called Hon Lik, who in 2003 announced to the tobacco industry that he was patenting electronic cigarettes. And the tobacco industry said, okay, you go for that, loser. Now they all pay him $175 million each in terms of brand licenses. What could disrupt you? The question should be then, if, as the winds of change are blowing, we can either build a wall or we can build a windmill, how do we convert change into fuel? How can we use change as a fueling mechanism? Bearing in mind today is the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. Everything around us is inspiration that we can use as fuel. For instance, if we see something that's totally unrelated, like Airbnb, you might think that's nothing to do with our business. Peer-to-peer room rental service. But the reality is, if we look carefully, what they're actually doing is this. They're linking surplus to demand through accessibility. How could we link surplus to demand through accessibility? Is there anything that we have a surplus of that we could match to a demand that people might have in an accessible way? The more we look forward, we could see something like Kickstarter. This is a great campaign for an exploding kittens card game that raised a meager $8 million from the public. We look at Kickstarter and we think that's definitely nothing to do with accountancy or bookkeeping. No way, Jose, you've got the wrong stand, John. The reality is, if we we distill that under the skin, what that's actually doing is it's linking belief to production through investment. Which ways could we link people's belief to the production of goods through investment? All of these, by the way, are convertible fuels that we can use. If we look at some of these brilliant innovations from Japan, I mean, this is one of my favorites. I know what you're thinking. Firstly, that is probably the best innovation I've ever seen in my life. Secondly, where can I buy it? You won't be alone. A link will come later. Third, in fact, if we actually distill it, go one level down, what's actually going on here? The reality is it's linking behavior to purpose through design. Which ways can we link behavior from our customers or our partners to a purpose that would be useful through redesigning the way that things could be used? If we look at this, which is possibly one of the world's greatest inventions other than the floor mops, the Lego Strip Club, you might look at that and say, I can't believe it, it's 11 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, and I'm looking at a picture of Lego Strip Club thinking, okay, the Kodak story wasn't really relevant to me, you've lost me now. Unless, of course, you look at it in a totally different way. Not in terms of the fact that strippers can't be that good if they can't bend their knees, but more in terms of the fact that this is linking demand to innovation through adjustment of something that's already there. Which ways can we link demand to innovation that we would like to do through adjustment of what's already existing? Every single thing we see around us that's changing has this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to give you the answers for the next set. You can look at what you see and think, how could we find out what the main thing is going on and then use that for ourselves? Okay? For instance, the evolution of media is such that anyone here who's advertising and marketing their services will know that the humans who are digitally connected in the world are connected to an average of 120 people each. It means the second tier reach in terms of media is 14,400. The third tier media reach is 1.728 million. It's just 120 by 120 by 120 by 120. That's the way that social dynamics and social currencies work, which means that it's no such thing as social media. People are the media. And their reach far exceeds our grasp. The only thing is, to actually use this, we have to do two things. One, act in ways that people actually believe in, so they care. Two, we need to actually consider the fact that it's actually a currency for them as opposed to us. Them sharing should benefit us second, not first. People are the media. If we look at the evolution of relationships, it turns out the birth rate in Southeast Asia has now fallen by 11% due to the fact that about 15% of men aged 15 to 20 would prefer to have a digital girlfriend, a virtual girlfriend, rather than a physical one. This is a resort in Japan called Love Plus, where you take your virtual girlfriend with you that you can only see through a screen. It's affecting the birth rate. As I say, 15% of men would prefer to have a virtual girlfriend. The question also is why there's about 91% of women that would prefer to have a virtual boyfriend. But I can't account for that fact. This is the evolution of relationships. Think about why I'm showing you this slide. If virtualization is increasing, and even more so into haptic holographics that you can actually physically touch, what does that mean in terms of the personal relationships we have as accountants or bookkeepers or workers in the financial services industries? Nothing, not one syllable I have uttered, nor one slide you will see is based in the future. The fact that you might not see it yet is not the problem of the innovation. What does it mean when the evolution of ownership is such that people don't necessarily need to own anything now? I showed my daughter my LPs. You remember LPs, vinyl LPs, polyvinyl acetate? And I said, what do you think this is? She said, is that where you store your downloads? We're living in a weird world. The evolution of ownership is such that people don't need to own anything now. Think about what that means to your business. When Zipcar, for instance, came along, I showed the chief exec of Avis Zipcar in 2008. He laughed so much I could still hear him laughing in the car park. Ironically, of course, 100 months later, he bought Zipcar for $500 million. It's a weird world we live in. As we move forward, we actually look at all of these vendors. Uber, Facebook, Alibaba, who on one day in November last year turned over $5 billion in a day. Alibaba is bigger than eBay and Amazon combined times 2. Airbnb. What do you think this means for the financial industry? As we move forward, we look at the evolution of connectivity. Everyone's asking me about what the future of broadband is and whether or not they should switch from BT to EE to TalkTalk. I'm more interested in what it means when Google Loon, the balloon project that's going to connect the next billion people together, has already been launched. Or what pure Wi-Fi means, where these lights up here, these LED lights, are the transmitter of a Wi-Fi signal. What that means to broadband providers when LED is also Wi-Fi. Not one syllable I've uttered, nor one slide I've shown you is based in the future. What does it mean to how we connect to our customers? What will they expect? What will it mean when the zoomable contact lenses that I tried out in South Korea last month, or the tiny robotic scallops that swim into your eye and fix your retina problems, or the digital smart medicine that goes into your body, and so your body tells you what's right for you or what's wrong for you? Think about what this means to your business, but more importantly as well, your customers' businesses. When the entire medical profession is replaced by your own bloodstream telling you what's wrong with you. What happens to optics? What happens to retail? What happens to marketing? Is this chair comfortable for me? Because it says really comfortable chair on the label. I'll sit down on it and my back will tell me if it's comfortable. What does it mean then in the evolution of finance where 2 billion people have a mobile but no bank? What will their expectations be of us? Which ways can we use this as a fueling mechanism rather than a wall that we look at and try and resist the change, but as a fueling mechanism of our windmill? What does it mean when 48 hours ago, NASDAQ said they were going to try out blockchain? Who here knows about blockchain? There is not one thing in the world of bookkeeping, finance, banking, and currency that is more disruptive than blockchain. And one person in this room knows about it. NASDAQ announced a trial at 9 o'clock in the morning 2 days ago. You needed to have that news feed. Blockchain. Blockchain is a piece of technology that actually was created by the founder of Bitcoin in 2008. And essentially what it is it's a public ledger. It's a traceable ledger that enables any movements of transaction to happen without any intermediary party whatsoever. No bank, no accountant, no bookkeeper, no retailer, no payment service provider. Blockchain. Now, I must admit, when I created this presentation, I thought that every single person in here would be all over this. But just in case you weren't, what I did is, because I don't have enough time, I created actually an entire little video about what I think you need to do about blockchain, specifically in the accounting industry, bookkeeping industry, financial sector. I've created a video. I'm going to give you a link to that video in a second. But I just want to show you just categorically why, in fact, it is the biggest opportunity or the biggest risk, depending on whether you want to build a wall or you want to build a windmill. Because it happens like this. The actual disruption was the internet. The actual disruption is the internet. But the reality with disruption is it creeps. It starts on the far right. Blockchain's been enabled. No one knows about it. New solution providers are already launching, none of which would ever bother coming to Excel. NASDAQ start trialing it. Amazon will start accepting blockchain, which, by the way, is 3 million different cryptocurrencies all in one. And then the entire banking, legal, insurance, finance industry feels the burn on the delta between the linear and the exponential. I've been doing this for 25 years. I guarantee you that that will happen. But this is a motivational speech, so the good news is there's loads of stuff we can do about it. I promise. I'm getting there. Hopefully I've got enough time. So the top link here, thought expansion. I want you to take your phone out, get your pen. Believe me, I know you might not feel like doing it, but write it down. Even you, sir, write it down because I'm trying to help your careers here. So write this down, take a picture. It's free of charge. I recorded a video in my own time, unpaid, of what I would do if I was your company about blockchain. And you can also download this deck from this link as well. So you get an email, and that's it. You're also then connected to me through that if you want to. It's free of charge. It's all fine. Now, you might notice there's a second link there, and I'm not going to promote this at all, other than to say that I do this over 1, 2, or 3 days in something called the Unlock Sessions. So we actually can build unfair competitive advantage for people. I do that in mini workshops of 10 to 12 people. If you, in the future, you want to be in one, theunlocksessions.net, go there, drop your email in, and I'll be in touch. Because we do them all over the world, from Bali to Austin, Texas, to London, to Berlin. Anyway, but that's the one with the deck and the video link. And if you want to actually beat your competitors using anything that you've heard, the second link's the key. Now, what you have seen in this whistle-stop tour, I've only been given 30 minutes, and believe it or not, I do up to 9 hours sometimes. So what we saw in this here, we saw some changes. None of the slides were put in there by accident. I've never done the same keynote twice in my life. Everything is based on having an attendee list of everyone in this conference and assuming that everyone inside this hall was coming to this. So these slides were for you. These slides are here. At any stage, did you see something that you might have thought was a low threat? Just think about it. Did you think of anything that wasn't relevant? Was there anything that I showed you, including the Lego strip club? I know it's relevant to you. Anything that you saw that you thought, this isn't relevant? Turn your fan on. And he did as well, I was kidding. Stand up, sit down. This low threat rating here, the low threat rating, lack of relevance maybe. Oh, John, but that's miles out. Haptic holographics, you're telling me that a business person won't need to meet a physical accountant? Well, yeah. They'll still want to meet someone physical, but there'll also be far, far, far more virtual experiences. So all of these things here, the question is, where are we on this map? And as we move across, where do you think we sit? Within the next 12 months, there will be McKinsey, Bain, BCG, KPMG writing white papers that will arrive in your inbox about why we were blindsided by blockchain technology, and another 8 things that I've hidden inside the deck that you saw. Which part are you going to take from the disruption and turn it into a massive, great, big, fat, smelly opportunity? In half an hour to the second, I've covered what from an external perspective, but a family full of accountants, admittedly, I've scanned the entire landscape, and I believe that everything I've seen will either destroy the businesses that you're in, or inside this room, will create the next absolute game-changing market leaders. The good news is it's purely down to how you interpret what you've seen. I cannot do any more than that. Thank you very much.